So telling the difficult story that our lives are basically a whole series of little stories. And a lot of times we as individuals and we as societies like to shy away from pieces of the stories because they're upsetting, because they're unpleasant, because they may remind us that we all have multiple sides and that we are actually fully human. And there's some stories that really need to be told because people need to know that they are not the only ones in the world and that they are not flying solo in dealing with some of the difficult stuff. So in many traditional stories, I have to go back. Anyway, in many traditional stories, the wolf character is sort of seen as the force of danger, as the thing to be afraid of. And a lot of times, Jung and other psychologists have talked about the fact that the wolf also just represents our shadow self. It represents part of our whole self. And so what happens when we let the wolf in rather than trying to shut the wolf out? I love this quote from Hemingway. "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong at the broken places." And I love the fact that art, beautiful art, can be made from broken pieces. And kintsukuroi is such a beautiful art form. And I have a very small piece of this that I adore because it reminds me of that idea of that the brokenness is what makes for extra beauty. There's a wonderful book by Lauren Nemi and Elizabeth Ellis that's actually called Inviting the Wolf In. And here's a couple of quotes. You can read them. But I love this idea of acknowledging our experience and imagination with both sides of our nature, spirit and flesh, divine and profane, hero and trickster. And that the most direct path to understanding is not a straight line, but it's a journey into imagination. So this is a triangle, as you can see. I have teller at the top, but you could put artist there just as easily. And that the art form, as you can see, holds its own space in this triangle. And the teller and the audience and the story or the art form all form equal parts in this triangle. And that in this triangle, there's a series of interlocking threads that weave: permission, trust, ownership. And this has to be something that is earned, and it has to be something that you recognize the need for permission from your audience, permission from yourself, permission from your art form, a trust in all of them, and a sense of ownership. And by ownership, what's meant is not that something is yours, but that you know it so well that it's internal, that you own it inside, and that doesn't have to be a thing. I like to say that art can be therapeutic, but art does not equal therapy. And especially in the theater arts and in storytelling, I think a lot of times it can be easily mistaken. And it's something that I'm often warning young artists about, especially those who are perhaps creating their own one-person show for the first time. So here's some tools. This will look very similar to a lot of tools that most artists use. Variations on these: metaphor, imagery, tone, point of view, point of entry. Where on the wickedness and loss continuum are you, and what is the emotional arc? So here's a few things, and we'll come back to all of this, but my 4 ways in to helping explain to young tellers, young theater artists about how to get into a difficult story is you ease into it, you offer a glancing blow, you then discover the moment of truth, and there always needs to be recovery, resilience, or a moment of grace at the end. So we're going to do a little exercise, if you don't mind. And you can think of something. It doesn't have to be something that you're slightly ashamed of. It could be just something that you're embarrassed about, something that you think shows you in less than a perfect light. All of us have those moments because we are fully human. It can be anything. It can be, for me, it could be the time I walked across the college cafeteria with my skirt tucked into my underpants after going to the bathroom, and I didn't realize it. And everybody saw it. It could be that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, I'm going to stop sharing this. And I want you to take, does everybody have a moment that they are embarrassed by? It's like, ooh, I don't like admitting this about myself. Yeah. Does everybody have at least one they can think of? And if you don't, that's fine. And if you don't want to do this, that is fine. But I would like you now to take a few moments, and I'd like you to write down, if you have something to write with, or go get something to write with, I'd like you to write down 3 to 5 images that surround that moment, that thing. 3 to 5 images that just come to mind. Okay, great. So everybody has a few images that come to mind, descriptions of moments or something like that. Now, taking a look at that, are there particular colors that jump out at you? Is there a color or colors that you notice? And are there sensory details that you notice? Sound, taste, touch. And be sure to either circle them or write them down so that you've got your words. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you if you want to share your color or sensory words to share. One of the reasons that I like using this as one of my ways in is that a lot of times the hard stories, one of the reasons that they're hard and they're potent is, well, stories are potent just because of the emotional connections that get made. And emotions and sensory details are intimately connected. We remember the things that when our senses are on high alert, we smell, we hear, we taste, and we remember. And so it's a sly way in. It's a gentle way in for you as well as for the audience. Now, I'm going to be talking in theater and storytelling terms because that's what I do. But in my mind, for me as an artist, what I do is to give something as a gift, hopefully, to the audience. I'm sharing something. It's that idea of the triangle, right? There's me, there's the audience, but there's this other thing. And this other thing needs to be honored. It has an existence outside of me. Even if this is a story about me, the story starts to have an existence outside of me, which is how it's been transformed from life into art. When I'm able to step out and take that gem of a moment and turn it so that I'm looking at it from a slightly different angle and a different facet, I will see new things in it. And I'm able to show the audience new things by that. I think we are the stories we tell. We can be the stories we choose to tell. And by finding ways to reshape those broken pieces out of our life, we get to rebuild that part of our life too. We get to, or if it's not our life, out of our community's life, out of just the pain in the world, we can transform that into something else by using our art to do it. And so being mindful of the audience and how they need to be treated gently. You know, coming in and bashing people over the head with a hammer only works maybe one time. Most of this is like, you need to find a way to get people to be willing to listen, or to be willing to look, to be willing to see, and then you can show it to them. But if you come in and everybody's already going, nope, then you've lost a huge opportunity. And so for me, that idea of easing in and using something that is familiar to everybody, colors, tastes, sensations. We all have colors that we connect with. We all have tastes. And so finding the things that are universal and that connect. So I will tell you that as I was just thinking about this, I found a different embarrassing moment, because I have so many of them in my life. So in this, I wrote down red tongue, white bread, rough bark, warm sun. Those are my terms. Does anybody else want to share their colors or terms or images, their colors, the sensory things? Great. Go ahead, Jackie.
Okay. This is really interesting. Interesting too, because when we were first writing the words, I was thinking in sensory instead of pictures. So I had to kind of just like compartmentalize my brain a little, because what was coming to me was sensory and sort of descriptive kind of things as opposed to just picture. Anyway, so if you're going to talk about like color and then feeling, is that the direction? Okay. So then there are three would be gray fear, silver blinded, I don't know how to say it, silver blinded squinting, something like this. And then slate freeze.
Okay. So gray and silver and slate and fear and
sort of like blinded, like
blinded. Okay.
Yeah, and then frozen or
Frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else interested in sharing, willing to share?
I can share.
Great.
Flame orange, purple weight, gray like a winter sky, as if carving a separate space.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So
Oh,
in,
yeah, I got
oh,
one.
great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, white space, stop echo, self-stung.
The idea isn't necessarily to describe the whole thing in just a couple of words, but like if these moments in this embarrassing moment, if like there's pieces of this embarrassing moment that like, oh, the light through the windows, like I remember that, or the green ruffled skirt, right? Like these images that just jump out from that story. That the image is what can lead us into the story, right?
Well, this is a feeling. Okay, this
Okay.
was during a high school football game, and there was no feeling that I've ever had of like having a football uniform on and a helmet. And it's a particular, you feel like you're in a suit of armor or something, and that sort of brings me into the moment of what happened. And the only color I could think of was like a dun color, like the color of dead grass.
That's awesome.
That is great.
That is an awesome description. I love it.
I have red door slam turning into charcoal gray disbelief into blue quiet.
As you're thinking about this, the story, your memory of this thing, this time, if you can put together what I call basically the spine, like if you have like literally in sequential order of what happened first, what happened next, what happened after that, what happened after that, what happened at the end. Like, can you five bones to put in this spine? So now, if you look at your list of words or feelings and put them, line them up or draw arrows to where in your plot points these words fit in. And one of the really interesting things to do is to see what happens when you start with that idea of point of entry that was in that little slideshow I showed you. Is like, where do you start your story? And so if I were to look at my red, now I have a lot of color associations with red. I have red hair. I turn beet red in the sun. Red for anger, red for love, red is my favorite color. I have a lot of red associations. And red tongue figures very prominently in this story. And so I could start with talking about why I love the color red. And that could be a way in. Because, you know, red can also be for illicit, sexy. I love red. Right? There's two sides to this. So there's ways that you can kind of ease in, give a hint, and then go. And this idea of dropping hints along the way to sort of, so that there's not a shock moment for the audience, that there's not a, so these stories about embarrassing things, if they're just embarrassing things, right? These are not really terribly difficult stories. There are difficult stories about traumas, stories about rape or betrayal or child abuse or racism and prejudice, war, you know, despair, eating disorders. Those are very difficult stories. They're about difficult, problematic subject matters, problematic in that they create a lot of unsettled feelings, both in the artist sometimes and in the audience. And so what I'm trying to lead you through is a very lightweight way of kind of thinking about these things so that the same rules apply to the heavier subjects. And if there's time at the end, I will tell you one of my difficult stories. But for now, I will tell you that my story is about sneaking Jello, sneaking dried Jello, and the illicit love affair I had with the thrill of like doing something really bad, right? So that's the framework of my difficult story that I'm playing with right now. Does anybody else want to share the framework of kind of like, oh, here's basically what my thing is? And no is a fine answer. Okay, so looking at your list and looking at some of your words, now see what happens if you start to write from the middle. See what happens if you begin at the middle, at an image from the middle, and maybe work back up to that moment, and then move on. So when I talked about art not being therapy, part of it is that what I mean by that is that, especially for those of us that perform our art in public, when people pay to come and see our art, they are not paying for them to be the therapist couch for us. They, you know, there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of young artists who think that in order to have something be really powerful, they have to kind of rip their heart open and spill their guts all over the stage emotionally. And that can be powerful, but that is usually mostly powerful for the artist and not much for anybody else. And that is what I mean by doing therapy. When something is being done for the benefit of the artist without much thought and consideration for what's going on with the audience, then it's the artist doing their own therapy in front of people paying to see it. And a lot of times when we have really difficult stories to tell, sometimes the stories aren't ready to be told to an audience yet. Sometimes these stories are stories we just need to work on because it's we're getting ourselves ready to be able to tell. There's a story that I worked on, I tried to tell for years. I tried to figure out how to include it in shows for years. And it was never the right time. It was never the appropriate project. I clearly was not ready yet because I couldn't get through it without crying. And so sometimes for the artist, especially if it's something that is very deeply personal and painful for you, sometimes we have to ease in for ourselves as well. And so the way I found to ease in was to start using some very traditional story, some mythology. And so I could use mythology as a way of creating the vessel to pour my story into it. Traditional stories work that way too. You know, you can take some of the characters from very traditional stories and rework them in a way that can be tell your story without you having to say that it's you, if that feels uncomfortable. You can, and if it's not a personal story, if you want to tell a story about the oppression of women, say, historically, and you want to take you don't want it to sound like you're, you know, jumping on a bandwagon and doing all the latest newsreels, right? You can take a traditional story and rework it, find some, like, what are the colors basically that jump out of that story? What's a different way in? And a story is never, a story or a piece of theater, it's not ready for an artist the first time you tell it, right? It's not ready for an audience yet. But the process of working on it, the process of shaping it, of developing it, that's where a lot of the art comes in. That's where a lot of the craft comes in. And that's where a lot of the therapy for us as artists comes in. As we keep returning, honing, reshaping, reframing, reimagining, we can turn these terrible parts of our lives into really beautiful, grace-filled, resilient art. And it is art when it's, and we are ready for an audience to hear it, to see it. So if you're willing, I will tell you my difficult story. And I may decide whether I want this part of the recording shared or not, Dave. Thank you. Because that's also a very important thing to remember, is who's your audience. In fact, I don't think I want this recorded. Thank you. Yeah, knowing who your audience is, because these difficult stories generally need to be told in a particular, like, they're usually told in a setting, right? They're usually told surrounded by something. If it's artwork hung on a wall, it is surrounded by other artwork to create a whole feeling for the people that are there. If it's a poem that's with one poem before it and another poem after it that helps give it context. Sometimes, you know, songs, the intro, the music, the melody, all of it can help create the setting for the audience to be able to hear um, with ears that are ready to hear. And it's not just throwing something out into the universe and saying, well, if you don't like it, tough, you know. I think that, you know, it's important, especially if it's really, really difficult stuff, to have some kind of let people know, hey, this is a tough story for me to tell. Or, you know, I'm going to be dealing with some hard things. And if this is upsetting for you, you are welcome to get up and leave, and I will not have my feelings hurt at all. However, you know, whatever, however you want to frame it and shape it, that's a way of giving the audience ownership too. By allowing them to take ownership of what they hear or don't hear, or see or don't see.
Yes, Mary, thanks again.
Mm, mhm,
Yeah, that was really cool. Thanks for
Good
thank
job, Mary.
you.
bringing us through that.
And I'll abbreviate Mary's piece and put that up too. Because you know something, that's beginning to attract other eyes and ears and brains out there, and it strengthens our community when people see what we're doing and how valuable these sessions are. So I'm going to try to continue to do that. All right, everybody. I love you all.
Peace.
Thank you so much.
Peace and love.
Vaccinate, wear your mask, be well.
Take it easy.